By the time I was 15, I had been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, was taking medication, and going to therapy. My first semester of college had its ups and downs, but after a medication change during winter break, I hit a new low. I wasn't eating, I was sleeping almost all day, I was missing classes, I was crying all the time, and I was focusing on death and dying. Then, while walking to the library, a thought popped into my head that I didn't recognize as my own. It was telling me to jump in front of a car. I didn't want to listen to it, but I was scared I wouldn't be able to resist. Paralyzed, I immediately called my mom asking for help. Soon, employees from the school counseling center had arrived to come get me, and an ambulance was called to take me to the hospital. I was terrified, but some part of me knew that I needed help. Once I was admitted, I remember thinking, I hope I never have to come back here. That was my first hospitalization, but luckily I had the support of friends and family through my second and third hospitalizations as well. My mom was by my side every time, flying up from Louisville, Kentucky to Boston, which was not one, but 2 flights each time. Because my mom usually couldn't get there until I was admitted, family friends who lived in the area stepped in and took care of me until she got there. I still feel a little guilty about the fact that all these people dropped everything to take care of me in those moments, but most of all, I am grateful that I have so many people who love me. Even when my brain was telling me to kill myself, I never really wanted to die because in those low moments I was surrounded by friends and family who I knew cared deeply for me. After a little over a week in the hospital, I started to feel better and was discharged. I went back to school and had a successful semester, despite the difficult start. Coincidentally, I first began to experience symptoms of paranoia, delusions, and hallucinations while I was taking abnormal psychology, the semester after my first hospitalization during the start of my sophomore year. Although I fully understood what I was learning about psychotic disorders in class, it was difficult to recognize those same symptoms in myself. Hallucinations involve seeing, hearing, or feeling things that aren't real. Delusions involve believing things that aren't real. And paranoia usually involves unrealistic distrust and suspicion. Most often, people with psychosis feel that the symptoms they're experiencing are real, and that's what was happening to me. That semester, I spent a lot of time walking around campus alone and began to suspect that someone was following me. As the paranoia progressed, I became more and more sure of it. I could feel someone behind me, I could hear footsteps, and eventually I began to believe that someone was trying to kill me. I was scared to tell anyone about how I was feeling and about how terrified I was. I was worried no one would believe me. Eventually, I decided it was best not to leave my room. At this point, I couldn't function normally anymore, and it became necessary for other people to step in and get me help. This is what led to my second hospitalization. I again left feeling better than when I had gone in, eventually realizing that what I was experiencing were symptoms of an illness and not reality. What illness? The doctors could not figure out. I remember my discharge papers listed my diagnosis as psychosis NOS. NOS stands for not otherwise specified. Even after 9 days in the hospital, some of which overlapped with finals, I was able to finish the semester with an extension from one of my professors. But over winter break that year, the frequency of my hallucinations seemed to increase, and I started spring semester on shaky ground. A little over 2 months into the semester, I reached the tipping point. I wouldn't eat or take medication for fear of being poisoned, and I wouldn't leave my room. Eventually, some family friends coaxed me outside and into their car so I could be taken to the hospital. I honestly don't remember much after that. Psychosis can mess with your memory. What I do know is that I was really going through it. Hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, all of it. The thing I remember most is being scared to death. However, with the combination of encouragement and care from my mom and the doctors, nurses, and staff at the hospital, I was started on a new antipsychotic medication and began to feel better. It was at that hospital that I decided to take a leave of absence from school so that I could focus on my recovery. I realized that my symptoms were exacerbated by stress and that I needed time to learn how to care for myself properly, to manage this new illness, and to care for my mental and emotional health, which I had neglected so far. When I was deciding whether or not to leave school, a social worker in the hospital said, "If you leave now, you'll probably never come back." Luckily, I proved her wrong, and now I am back at Brandeis in an online capacity. As I mentioned before, I am amazingly lucky to have this support system of family and friends. I definitely don't want to discount that. But even with a mom who's a social worker for adults with serious mental illness, I found it very difficult to talk about my experiences in the hospital with her or with anyone else in my support system. I want to be able to process the difficult things I've experienced, but heavy stuff like that doesn't come up in everyday conversation, and I've found that when I do bring it up, people are quick to try and end the conversation. Even for people who support you the most, it can be hard to truly understand what you're going through, both in the hospital and when you have to live with those memories afterward. That's why I jumped at the opportunity to do this as my brave, in order to process my own emotions around my journey and to start a conversation about mental health that I believe many people weren't having. I know I wasn't having it. It was during my time away from school that I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. Schizoaffective disorder is characterized by symptoms of depression combined with symptoms of psychosis. I guess I'm lucky I don't just have a mood disorder like depression or just have a psychotic disorder like schizophrenia. I have both. To manage my symptoms today, I take oral antidepressants and get a long-acting antipsychotic injection once a month. It's a little embarrassing to have to get a shot in your butt every month, but trust me, I wouldn't do it if it wasn't worth it. I'm actually currently in the process of reducing my dose of antidepressants and possibly going off of them completely. It's hard to tell if I feel good because of my medication or in spite of it, but I told my prescriber that now that I've been in a stable place for several years, I want to try life without an antidepressant. I've been on one for almost 8 years. I also go to therapy. Medication isn't a cure-all, and therapy helps you learn the skills to manage your illness for the long term. Although mental illness can sound scary and sometimes can feel scary, my life is not much different than anyone else managing a long-term physical illness. In the beginning, it was hard to manage, but after almost 2 years of treatment and practice dealing with symptoms, I live a pretty normal life. Schizoaffective disorder is a chronic illness, and like all mental illnesses, there is no cure. But I think all of us deal with things in life that test our strength and resilience. This is mine. My name is Ruby, and this is my brave.